Hello, and welcome to my morning podcast where I will be reading certain extracts from books. So, what I've done is I've used angel cards and numerology to select certain books from my bookshelf. I have so many books that I need to read, known as to be read books on my to be read bookshelf. Actually, it's just my bookshelves. And there's so many books that I've bought and wanted to read, and then I never read them. So sometimes I just feel really overwhelmed, and then I don't even know which book I want to read. Sometimes when we have too much choice, we're paralyzed by having too much choice. Our human brains don't want to have too much choice. It's like when you're on Netflix, you spend an hour flicking through your My List trying to figure out what you want to watch, and sometimes you just want someone to tell you, watch this. I think that's why I really love watching films at the cinema, because it's a limited choice. And so what I've done is I just shuffled one of my angel card decks, and whichever number is on the card, I then go to my bookshelf and count and then pick a book. And so my aim is to read the first page of that book, and then I shuffle the cards again to choose another page. And sometimes I just choose a card for a specific page. But today what I did, I chose two cards. The first card was for the chapter, and then the second card was the page within the chapter. So I just put the intention in the cards that I would like my angel guides to guide me, what I need to know, and also what the collective consciousness need to know from these books, because there's a lot of guidance from people who have written these books, people who aren't no longer on earth, and they can still give us their knowledge. So the first book. So I've got like a backlog, actually 3 days worth. So the first book. I've got loads of books to get through today. Anyways, first book is Watchmen and Philosophy, a Rorschach, I don't know how to pronounce that, test. Series editor William Irwin, edited by Mark D. White. So this is basically the philosophy of the film The Watchmen. So if you have not seen it, it's a really good, dark, I think, superhero film with lots of philosophical concepts. So from the first page, introduction, the writer talks about how he read the entire issue of Watchmen and he realized that comics will be changed forever. And I quote, "In Watchmen, Alan Moore and Dave Gibbons gave us a glimpse of what a world with costumed heroes might actually look like. And it wasn't pretty. This was not the shiny world of tomorrow that was so familiar from the Superman comics. The world of Watchmen surpassed even the grim and gritty Gotham City and Hell's Kitchen of Frank Miller's Batman and Daredevil stories. These were not your noble, perfect, shiny heroes either." So, yeah, he just talks about how just because these superheroes have these superpowers doesn't automatically make them, good people. And they are inherently human with human flaws and stuff like that. And then he mentions how Dr. Manhattan, who has limitless power, doesn't really know what to do with it. And he's almost passive in utilizing his powers. He kind of, I think, it's been a long time since I watched the film, but that's the kind of impression you get, that he doesn't want to get involved. He just wants humans to just, do their thing. Even though he's the most powerful. I think he's the most powerful of all superheroes because he literally can do everything. Okay, so the next book is Missing Out, In Praise of the Unlived Life. I really love this book. I've only read a few pages of it many years ago, but it's such a good book because it talks about how we live two lives, one life that we actually live and the unlived life, the life that we live in our minds and in our imagination. And it's by Adam Phillips. And Sunday Telegraph review is startling, rewarding, illuminating, extraordinary. Phillips is one of those writers whom it is a pleasure simply to hear think. So I'm just going to read some of the reviews at the back of the book. So the blurb. Peppered, so this is from The Independent, peppered with the kind of insights that make you scroll yes in the margins on almost every page. Glimpses of the real, true, messy, and never knowable human heart. And a fascinating book, very illuminating. Guardian. Just going to read the blurb now. We all have two lives, the life we live and the life of our fantasies. But it is the life unlived, the person we have failed to be, that can trouble and even haunt us. In Missing Out, acclaimed psychoanalyst Adam Phillips delves into the gap between who we are and who we are not to discover whether or not getting what we want may be the unlikely key to the fully lived life. And so I'm just going to read from the prologue, which is the first page. The unexamined life is surely worth living, but is the unlived life worth examining? So the author is asking, the life that we don't live, is that worth examining, analyzing? It seems a strange question until one realizes how much of our so-called mental life is about the lives we are not living. So our thoughts are preoccupied about the lives that we aren't actually living, the lives we are missing out on, the lives we could be leading, but for some reason are not. What we fantasize about, what we long for, are the experiences, the things and the people that are absent. It is the absence of what we need that makes us think, that makes us cross and sad. We have to be aware of what is missing in our lives, even if this often obscures both what we already have and what is actually available. Because we can survive only if our appetites more or less work for us. Indeed, we have to survive our appetites by making people cooperate with our wanting. We pressurize the world to be there for our benefit. And yet, we quickly notice as children, it is perhaps the first thing we do notice, that our needs, like our wishes, are always potentially unmet. Because we are always shadowed by the possibility of not getting what we want. We learn, at best, to ironize our wishes, that is, to call our wants wishes. A wish is only a wish until, as we say, it comes true, and at worst, to hate our needs. But we also learn to live somewhere between the lives we have and the lives we would like. So I'm definitely going to come back to this book at a later time to read it properly from beginning to end. So like I mentioned, I randomly have chosen a page from inside the book by numerology of the angel cards. I'm just going to read this little really nice paragraph about what Freud talks about, how the difference between fantasizing about something and then wanting to actually do it in real life so you can feel it, so it's not just a daydream. Freud is describing a simple process. You are hungry. You fantasize a delicious meal. This fantasy doesn't satisfy you because it's just in your imagination. You're not physically eating the meal. It doesn't nourish you or fill you up, and you start working out how in the world you can have this meal that you imagine. So that also is an interesting concept, that what you imagine, you then want to materialize into the physical reality. So what we think about, we kind of then tend to gravitate towards. You begin by hallucinating, that is, fantasizing, and you end up trying to get the wished for meal in the real world, which will at best be only an approximation of the one you wanted, but has the advantage of being one you can actually eat. So sometimes we have these imaginations and fantasies, and then the reality never quite meets up to the idea that we have in our head. But it's better than nothing. It's better than not actually experiencing it for real. Okay, so the second book that got chosen, so these are over 3 days, so I have like a backlog. So this is my most favorite book I've ever read. I read this as a teenager, I think, and it really influenced my life majorly. I learned so much from it. It's How to Win Friends and Influence People by Dale Carnegie. It's the best, one of the best books I've ever read. And I learned so much. So I'm just gonna read some extracts from it. The next book is a really cute book. It's How to Be Interesting in 10 Simple Steps by Jessica Hagy. And it's just so cute because it has diagrams and it's just really easy to read, and you just flip it open at some random pages and you get some really quick insights. This is probably a difficult book to describe in words. It's really visual, so you really need to actually look at the images. But I'm just going to read some extracts from the diagrams. So the first one is, I should tell you. Oh, yeah. Okay. So play devil's advocate. How true it is, people who believe it. And she's like done a diagram. Do the opposite of expected. Defend the guilty, question the pure, see which focus are opinions and which opinions are facts. There are many sides to every story and they all need to be told. Myths, advertisements, political promises, and urban legends. Okay, so the next one I selected was Simple Flavors. And she's done this really nice diagram of live concert, sight, sound, smell, fire alarm, touch, blah, blah, blah. Open your mouth and say nothing. Just observe. How does the early morning dew taste? What is the flavor profile of your commute? Does someone else's detergent remind you of childhood? Why do airports all smell the same? So that's really interesting, just to mix it up a bit. And, just one more. Dookie. Spend money like it's worth something. Vote with your wallet. Who gets your cash? Where do you get it? What people and companies are involved? Do you agree with their politics, practices, and behaviors? And is that all okay with you? If not, no, you can always make change with your money. So we as a collective have the power to vote with our money as such. For example, if there's a film that Hollywood wants to push towards but the audience is just not having it, then it's going to bomb because no one's going to go and watch it and spend money on it. And then Hollywood will realize that no, we don't want those type of films. So we can make a difference. Okay, the next book. So this is a really interesting book that I just saw in a bookshelf many years ago, and I just had to get it because it's why does the world exist? One man's quest for the big answer. But what I loved most of all was that Bruce Springsteen wrote a little one sentence review, and I love Bruce Springsteen, so I was like, okay, well, Bruce Springsteen's read this book and loves it, then I'm definitely gonna get it. So Bruce Springsteen wrote, I read it to get my existential buzz. So Why Does the World Exist by Jim Holt. I'm just going to read a review from Sarah Bakewell, New York Times. I can imagine few more enjoyable ways of thinking than to read this book. So now I'm going to read a humorous yet deeply profound New Scientist. The blurb. Why is there a world rather than nothing at all? Remains the most enduring of all questions. In this best-selling answer, Jim Holt enters the debate with a witty and original narrative that traces our efforts to understand the origins of the universe. Taking on the role of cosmological detective, he discovers the scientific and philosophical theories that help us find the key. Wondering whether we might have missed a trick in limiting our suspects to God and the Big Bang, he tracks down eccentric Oxford philosophers, a Buddhist monk, a Nobel laureate physicist, and a host of others who have spent their lives on this tantalizing puzzle. As he pieces together a solution and offers insights into time, consciousness, and eternity, he sheds fascinating new light on the biggest question of all. So I'm just going to read the first page. So, prologue. A quick proof that there must be something rather than nothing for modern people who lead busy lives. Suppose there were nothing, then there would be no laws, for laws, after all, are something. If there were no laws, then everything would be permitted. If everything were permitted, then nothing would be forbidden. So if there were nothing, nothing would be forbidden. Thus nothing is self-forbidding. Therefore, there must be something. QED. I'm just going to read the first page. Confronting the mystery. So he's written a couple of quotes. So the first one is from Ulysses, Alfred Lord Tennyson. And this grey spirit, yearning in desire to follow knowledge like a sinking star beyond the utmost bound of human thought. And the next quote is from Queen Victoria in a letter to her granddaughter, Princess Victoria of Hesse, 22nd of August, 1883. I would earnestly warn you against trying to find out the reason for an explanation of everything. To try and find out the reason for everything is very dangerous and leads to nothing but disappointment and dissatisfaction, unsettling your mind and in the end making you miserable. And the final quote is from Molly's Soliloquy in James Joyce's Ulysses. Well, who was the first person in the universe before there was anybody that made it all? Who? Ah, that they don't know, neither do I. So I'm just going to read a paragraph from the first page. I vividly remember when the mystery of existence first swam into my ken. It was in the early 1970s. I was a callow and would be rebellious high school student in rural Virginia. So second page, he talks about how as a child he had the question of why does the world exist, and from his religious upbringing is because he was taught that God created the world and that he created it out of nothing. That's why the world exists. And that's why I exist. As to why God himself existed, that was then left a little vague. Unlike the finite world that he freely created, God was eternal. And then he talks about how he asks other people, why does the world exist? And if you ask them why the universe exists, they'll say it exists because God made it. If you then ask them why God exists, the answer you get will depend on how theologically sophisticated they are. They might say that God is self-caused, that he is the ground of his own being, that his existence is contained in his very essence. Oh, I love that. I think it's very profound. Or they might tell you that people who ask such impious questions will burn in hell. Yeah, that's all programming, which I've totally let go now due to Abraham Hicks. So I'm really, really grateful. But suppose you ask non-believers to explain why there is a world rather than nothing at all, chances are they will not give you a very satisfying answer. So now I'm just going to read a random page from the book. So this is interlude. Could our world have been created by a hacker? Where did our universe come from? Doesn't its sheer existence point to an ultimate creative force at play? This question, when posed by religious believer to an atheist, generally elicits one of two responses. First, the atheist might say, if you do postulate such a creative force, you'd Better be prepared to postulate another one to explain its existence, and then another one behind that, and so forth. In other words, you end up in an infinite regress. The second atheist response is to say that even if there were an ultimate creative force, there is no reason to think of it as godlike. Why should the first cause be an infinitely wise and good being, let alone one that is minutely concerned with our inner thoughts? Why should it even have a mind? The idea that our cosmos was somehow made by an intelligent being might seem to be a primitive one, if not downright nutty. I disagree. But before dismissing it entirely, I thought it would be interesting to consult Andre Lind, who has done more than any other scientist to explain how our cosmos got going. So sometimes it's really good to read books that you don't agree with, or even read paragraphs that you don't agree with, because it just acts as a like a devil's advocate sort of thing, and it can also just exercise your brain as such. And you're like, no, I don't agree with that, and that's totally fine. Lind is a Russian physicist who emigrated to the blah 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 blah. He came up with the novel theory of the Big Bang that answered three vexing questions: what banged, why did it bang, and what was going on before it banged. Lind's theory, called chaotic inflation, explained the overall shape of space and the formation of galaxies. It also predicted the exact pattern of background radiation left over from the Big Bang that the COBE satellite observed in the 1990s. Well, among the curious implications of Lind's theory, one of the most striking is that it doesn't take all that much to create a universe. Resources on a cosmic scale are not required, nor are supernatural powers. It might even be possible for someone in a civilization not much more advanced than ours to cook up a new universe in a laboratory, which leads to an arresting thought. Could that be how our universe came into being? So that's interesting. Reminds me of a comic meme that I saw on Instagram where imagine if our universe is some aliens lab project, and it's like on a shelf in his bedroom or something. Okay, so now I've just randomly chosen a page. The oscillating model, something about the oscillating model. So sometimes you're like, oh my gosh, I'm just reading random stuff, but that's okay because your subconscious takes it in and it acts like little pegs. So next time you come across some information, you're like, oh, you have an association, and then you can attach it to that peg. Okay. Okay, so I really like this information about the Milky Way. One of the greatest lessons of history of science is that reality always turns out to be more encompassing than anyone imagined. At the beginning of the 20th century, our universe was thought to consist of just the Milky Way galaxy, sitting all by itself in an infinite space. Since then, we have learned that the Milky Way is merely one of 100 billion or so similar galaxies, and that's just the observable universe. The current theory that best explains the Big Bang is called the new inflationary cosmology. As it happens, this theory predicts that universe engendering explosions like the Big Bang should be a fairly routine occurrence. And he talks about how his friend said it would be very odd if the Big Bang came with a label that said, this mechanism operated only once. So in the inflationary scenario, our universe, the one that suddenly popped into existence some 14 billion years ago, bubbled out of the space-time of a pre-existing universe, instead of being all of physical reality. It's just an infinitesimal part of an ever reproducing multiverse. So multiverse comes up a lot in superhero comic books. With an eternal world, whether of the inflationary variety or some other, there is no inexplicable creation moment. There is no role for a first call. There is no arbitrary initial conditions. Okay. Okay, so the last book is another Dale Carnegie book, which is an amazing book, which I really, really loved reading when I was young, and I learned so much. It's amazing. It's How to Stop Worrying and Start Living, Time-Tested Methods for Conquering Worry. It's absolutely brilliant. I learned so much from it. So what I'm going to do is just going to read the random pages that were selected. The reason I'm recording this, even though I'm not going to publish it to the public because I'm just really rambling, is because one of the books that I randomly read last week through this whole angel and numerology selection was another Dale Carnegie book. It was about public speaking, and he said how when you have an audience, it kind of acts as a catalyst and motivation to really hone in your thoughts. And yeah, I can't remember the actual quote, but it was just really, really good. So that's why I should start recording my reading. So I'm just gonna read a couple of random pages. So this page isn't selected, but it was highlighted many years ago, so I just want to read it. One of the most tragic things I know about human nature is that all of us tend to put off living. We are all dreaming of some magical rose garden over the horizon instead of enjoying the roses that are blooming outside our windows today. Why are we such fools, such tragic fools? That's so true. We don't appreciate what we have right in front of us. We're like longing for a sunset in Hawaii, but we don't appreciate the sunset that we can see from our bedroom window. Okay, so I'm just going to read a couple of more pages that were highlighted for me by my past self. So this is the chapter Live in Day Tight Compartments, which has really helped me and shaped my way of life. I tend to live in day tight compartments and don't focus too much in the future. Okay, I had learned my lesson now. No more worry for me, no more regret about what had happened in the past, no more dread of the future. I concentrated all my time, energy, and enthusiasm into selling those blocks. Most of us are like that, stewing about yesterday's jam and worrying about tomorrow's jam, instead of spreading today's jam thick on our bread right now. Even the great French philosopher Montaigne, oh my gosh, that's amazing, because I actually have that book by Sarah something, and she translate all his essays, and one of them is read a lot but forget most of what you read, which I found really encouraging because I used to get really stressed about not remembering what I read. So even the great French philosopher Montaigne made that mistake. My life, he said, has been full of terrible misfortunes, most of which have never actually happened. So has mine, so has yours. Think, said Dante, that this day will never dawn again. Life is slipping away with incredible speed. We are racing through space at the rate of 19 miles every second. Today is our most precious possession. It is our only sure possession. And then philosophy of Lowell Thomas. This is the day which the Lord hath made. We will rejoice and be glad in it. Last page is this really nice story about Jack Dempsey losing the fight, the heavyweight championship, to Tunney, and how he didn't want to waste time worrying about that he lost and focused on new challenges. So then he made plans for the future, running the Jack Dempsey's restaurant on Broadway and the Great Northern Hotel. He did it by promoting prize fights and giving boxing exhibitions. He did it by getting so busy on something constructive that he had neither the time nor the temptation to worry about the past. I have had a better time during the last 10 years, he said, than I had when I was a champion. He then said he had not read many books, but without knowing it, he was following Shakespeare's advice. Wise men ne'er sit and wail their loss, but charily seek out how to redress their harms. So, yeah. So if there's something happened in the past, don't worry about it. Don't think about it. Just move on to something else. Just focus on something else. And that comes back to what Esther Hicks talks about as well. That just change the subject. Move on to something that pleases you. Don't dwell on what doesn't please you. And that is the end of the book reviews, book reading for this morning. So I'm tempted to read a page from Why I'm So Disorganized, but I think I will leave it because I'm feeling a bit hungry now. So I'm going to end this podcast. Thank you for watching. Well, not watching, listening. So I found the paragraph that I was referring to at the beginning of this particular piece. It's from Dale Carnegie's book, How to Develop Self-Confidence and Influence People by Public Speaking. And I really love this paragraph. And I quote, "Is there the faintest shadow of a reason why you should not be able to think as well in a perpendicular position before an audience as you can when sitting down?" As in sitting down on your own. Surely you know there is not. In fact, you ought to think better when facing a group or recording for an audience. Their presence ought to stir you and lift you. A great many speakers will tell you that the presence of an audience is a stimulus, an inspiration that drives their brains to function more clearly, more keenly. At such times, thoughts, facts, ideas that they did not know they possessed drift smoking by, as Henry Ward Beecher said, and they have but to reach out and lay their hands hot upon them. That ought to be your experience. It probably will be if you practice and persevere. So I really like that quote because it actually says that when you're recording or when you're knowing that you're going to publish it, it kind of acts as a way to inspire you and also to hone in on your thoughts. And yeah, Dale Carnegie said it better than I did, but you get the gist.